What's up, Advanced Churches all over the world? Donnie here from One Harbour Church in Morehead City, North Carolina. Miss you guys tons. I know this year's been crazy. Love you. So thankful to be in partnership with you, and I really hope this message blesses you. All right, so we have been dealing with a bunch of crazy curveballs here in 2020. That's all of us, no matter where you are watching this. And I feel like in this moment, the internet is not letting us down, and we're getting to really, see 2020 captured through some memes. We'll just kind of look at a couple of those. So here you have My Plans 2020. To all of you guys who were meant to have these awesome public graduations, this is what this year's felt like. Then there's Kevin here from The Office. My Plans, hard work when all that chili, and then there he is wallowing on the ground. And then finally, probably the one that sums up 2020 the best, My Plans, and then there's the iceberg that took down the Titanic. Everyone on social media is asking questions like, does 2020 come with a warranty? Other people speculating what's going to be next. Is it going to be aliens? Is it going to be, murder hornets? Thanks 2020. How crazy can this year get, right? We as a church here at One Harbour, we haven't met in person in our building since Sunday, March the 8th. And a lot of us have spent weeks or months isolated in our homes. So many businesses struggling. So many people have lost their jobs. Other businesses that just weren't able to sustain the losses and have had to shut down. For me, I felt, trying to lead a church, trying to be a pastor in this tumultuous season has meant constantly having to make decisions that I know I will think back on for the rest of my life. And added to that is that these decisions are ones I never imagined making. They're ones I don't really feel adequately prepared to make, and they're decisions that I don't feel like I have a whole lot of time to process, but they're such big decisions. I can't imagine what all of you are going through and the different, lives that you're living wherever you're at. It's just been a crazy year. And so in light of all that, what I want us to do is look at the Book of Proverbs. And the Book of Proverbs is really, it's timeless wisdom from God. It's relevant no matter who you are, where you are, when you're living. It's this incredible book. And I want us to dive in. I want us to look at how the Book of Proverbs, God's wisdom for us, applies to this crazy year we're having in 2020. A couple of verses just to start us off. In Proverbs 16, verse 9, it says, "The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." In Proverbs 16:33, it says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So 2020 has been nuts. Totally insane, right? But Proverbs would disagree with these memes. It would acknowledge that 2020 has been sad and it's been crazy and it's been hard, and all of us have felt, in a lot of ways, totally out of control. People asking me questions like, when's this going to happen? And when's this going to happen? I don't know. Nobody knows, right? But Proverbs would jump into that conversation, and it would say, hey, look, tomorrow's not some random, who knows, kind of thing. Actually, it's in the hands of a sovereign God. Proverbs starts off by telling us that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. It's to humbly acknowledge and surrender to the reality that God is in control, that he's made everything and that he knows what's happening and he has a plan. So when it comes to our planning, everything is really in his hands. And so I think the first thing we can learn from the book of Proverbs and applying to this year that we're living in is, man, we make plans, but they're all subject to God's will. Now, this is a humbling thing to admit, but it's a necessary thing to admit that we are not in control. But admitting that we're not in control is not then saying 2020 is in control. 2020 is some deranged train conductor and who knows where this thing's going, only 2020. No, we have a good God in heaven and he is at the helm. He knows and he's in control, right? So it's good for us to make plans, but we can't hold those things too tightly, because at the end of the day, the wisdom of God from Proverbs would say, man, all of our plans are subject to the Lord. And this is something that us Christians really need to hear. We're not good at accepting that God's will trumps our will. Instead, we're better at thinking that God should just get behind whatever we're doing. Like we should make plans and God should just bless them, right? But that makes us more like God than God, right? If all he's doing is sitting around hoping we'll make a plan so he can back it, well, who's really in charge here? This is a hard one for us, right? Actually, it's God has a plan and we should be trying to get behind that. This happens in lots of ways, silly ways. We'll often kind of like, we'll plan who we're going to marry. Haven't even gone on a date with them yet, but man, that's the one I want right there. That's a silly way, and we can easily all kind of like, look down on that. But then there's other things, and I think about things like this year for us as a church, things like we had these building projects we've been working towards, we've been praying for, we've been fundraising and doing all this work, and then 2020 comes and man, the scenario lays out where we have to walk away from some of these things. That was hard. And we prayed hard and we worked hard and we planned hard and then it just changed. Even this weekend, we were trying to do our first outdoor service. Big rain, lightning storm, canceled. Thanks 2020, right? It just feels like you can't really make any kind of plan, right? And so instead of kind of doing that thanks 2020 thing, the wisdom of God from Proverbs would call us to step back and go, no, God, you have a plan, and it is just bigger and better than my plan. And that's the other thing. God's plan isn't just different, it's exceptionally bigger and better. His character makes it better. His vantage point makes it better, right? God says it like this in Isaiah 55, verse 9. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts. Like, I don't know how you feel when you read that. I always feel kind of like, ouch. Like, man, God, why don't you consider my feelings next time, That's kind of a harsh way to put that. Intergalactically better than my plans. I mean, are we really that different? Yeah, we really are. God has plans that are infinitely bigger and infinitely better than ours. And so we can make plans, but we should hold them loosely because actually God's in control. Now maybe this makes you think, well, then what's the point of even making plans? I mean, what if we just kind of do this que sera, whatever will be, let's just wing it kind of approach to life. And the wisdom of God in Proverbs will jump in and say, no, it's still wisdom to plan and to prepare. I mean, it's very easy for us as human beings to kind of, we want it one way or another. We want to know, okay, is it God's sovereignty, like God's in control, or is it my plans, like I'm in control? And the Bible would answer that question, yes. Yes to both. Yes, your plans matter, and yes, God's in control. I love how Proverbs 21, verse 31 says it. The horse is made ready for the day of battle. It's made ready for the day of battle. But the victory belongs to the Lord. That horse is made ready for the day of battle. It speaks of planning. It speaks of a lot of hard work and a lot of planning. There's a long time that goes into a horse being made ready for battle. Years and years and years goes into that, right? Tons of expertise and all kinds of hard work and intentionality, diet and everything goes into a horse being made ready for battle. That speaks of the importance of our plans. It's good to do that. Proverbs 16, verse 1 and verse 9 says it like this. The plans of the Lord, the plans of the heart belong to a man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. So all this is saying, hey, look, our plans matter, and we should plan well, but at the end of the day, the Lord is going to establish it. He's going to do what he wants. So we have this free will, this responsibility to plan well, to prepare well, but at the end of the day, the Lord is in control. At the end of the day, it's up to his sovereignty to do what's right. And we don't like that very much as human beings. I mean, I'll admit I don't like that very much. I wish it was one way or another. And sometimes maybe in your most vulnerable moments, you might even think like, God, how would you like it? If we just, if someone just made plans for you. I mean, maybe you've ever felt like that. And, I would say, well, actually, God knows what it feels like. In a way, God knows what it feels like to have plans made for him, plans that don't seem on the surface, instantly good and beneficial. And the best example, the ultimate example is in Acts 2:23, where it says this, Paul describing the death of Jesus, he says, Peter says, this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan. Jesus delivered up. Why? According to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. And then he adds this, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. Now, 2020 has been brutal, to be sure. But according to this passage, the worst, most unjust thing that ever happened didn't happen in 2020. It happened to Jesus. It was the crucifixion of Jesus. And it was according to the definite plan, that the foreknowledge of God. That's how big and encompassing God's sovereignty is, right? But at the same time, Peter says, you crucified him. So yeah, God had this plan, and it's his sovereignty, but you did this, and so you're responsible, right? Now, I know it feels like a contradiction, but Scripture paints it like a mystery and calls us to embrace this mystery with humility, knowing that our plans matter, our decisions matter, but that ultimately God has a plan, and it's better than ours, and it will happen. So again, we should be diligent. We should plan, like getting that war horse ready. You know, for us, getting these building projects ready was, tons of work. For so many of you, man, you put in tons and tons of work into things that just changed overnight. The answer is not to not plan and not prepare. We should do all those things, but we should acknowledge that God is in control, that he establishes, he does what he sees as best. God's in control, but he wants us to plan well. And I think this gets to, the next thing, which is that the problem isn't really with our planning. I'll read you Proverbs 27, verse 1. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. What's this getting at? The problem isn't with our planning as much as it's with our boasting. God alone has the whole picture. He alone knows what will happen, but when we boast about our plans, what we seem to believe or indicate that we believe is that we know what God knows, right? That we're so sure about what's going to happen. Listen to how James speaks of this in chapter 4. He says, come on now, you guys who say today or tomorrow, we will go into such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. You're so clear about this stuff, yet you do not know what tomorrow would bring. How do you know? What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. That's who you are. In light of who God is, that's who we are. We're like a mist that appears and gone. Instead, what you ought to say, I'm glad he gives us something else. He says, hey, you should say something like this, if the Lord wills. If God wills, it's under his sovereignty. If the Lord wills, well, then we'll live and we'll do this and we'll do that. So we're going to make some plans, but we're going to hold those plans like this. Well, if the Lord wills, we'll, buy this building, or I'll marry this person, or whatever it is, right? If the Lord wills. And he adds this little line. He says, as it is, the way you're speaking with this, we're going to do this tomorrow, it's for sure. He says, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. He doesn't say all such planning is evil. It's the boasting that's the problem. It's the assumption that we know, that the arrogance that we know, right? So that the beginning of wisdom is this fear of the Lord. It's this stepping back from the boasting and saying, okay, God, actually, you know what's best. And so that's really the problem with much of our planning is that there's this boasting that's attached to it, this assumption that it's going to happen. And the more prayerful and invested you are into a decision, the more likely you are to begin to boast into it. And so just kind of know that as you weigh those things out. So God doesn't want us acting like that. And there's reasons behind it. It's not just because we're not God and we don't really know, but it's because it's the other thing that it breaks our hearts when things don't go like we thought they were going to go. It breaks our hearts. And Proverbs speaks of it like this. And in chapter 13, verse 12, it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But a desire, a plan that's fulfilled, it's a tree of life. What's this getting at? Well, it's getting at that our hearts, getting our hearts set on our plans, it's going to lead to disappointment. Makes the heart sick. I've always been struck by that language, that language of despair and disappointment and disillusionment. Your heart's sick. I mean, if 2020 hasn't taught us anything by now, it's this spoiler alert, things are not going to go as we planned, right? And when you get set on a plan, you get set on a dream, and it doesn't work out, sometimes it hurts so bad. It makes your heart sick. And I'm sure that all of us watching this have had this happen to us in one way or another this year. All of us have been dealt a blow or two or many from this year. And some of us, man, we've been hit hard, and our dreams were smashed and shattered on the ground. Overnight, a business we'd spent years, maybe decades building and preparing for was taken out. Friends of mine have lost their jobs and closed their businesses. And when these brutal things happen, it is normal and right and healthy to feel sad and to grieve them. But if the sadness goes further, if it gets to a heart sickness, a hopelessness of the heart, then what that reveals is that we had accidentally placed our hope on something that just could not bear the weight of it. I mean, it's right and normal to feel sad, but if we start to feel hopeless as a result of those things, what we're learning about ourselves in that is that somehow accidentally we put our hope on something that could never sustain it. And I hope by the end of this message, I can help you and me to make sure that we're putting our hope on someone who can actually handle it, right? But before we get there, let's have just a quick look at these plans. I mean, if they are going to be important, and this is God's wisdom, well, let's learn a few things from God's wisdom in Proverbs about how we make plans. One thing is in Proverbs 20, verse 18, it says, plans are established by counsel, by wise guidance wage war. Again, in chapter 11, verse 14, where there is no guidance, so there's none of that, a people fails. But in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. So this is just a lesson for us. God helps us make wise plans through the wisdom of friends, through the wisdom of counselors, through the wisdom of others. God helps us make plans through the wisdom of others. And this is a major problem with how a lot of people make plans. We just do whatever we want, and we do it in isolation. And it's an arrogance, you know. The same kind of arrogance that says we don't need God. It's saying we don't even need anybody else. We don't need anything. But Proverbs calls us to recognize that we need others. We need God, and we need the wisdom of God that he gives to us through other people. And the bigger the decision, by the way, the more important this is. I mean, the example here is waging war. Well, yeah, if you're going to wage war, you better get some counsel on that. You better get some wisdom on that. You don't just rush in there and pull the trigger or push the button. Like you need to think about this. You need to ask a few other people. And so the bigger the decision in our life, the more important the wise counsel becomes. I mean, what should I eat for lunch? Well, I'm a grown man. I mean, maybe I can figure it out by now. I mean, I can ask a couple of people, I guess, but I don't necessarily need to pull in the full cabinet of every wise counselor I know to figure out, don't eat a bunch of fried chicken, or whatever. I need to I can make some of those decisions, on my own, right? But who should I marry? Or, should I move over here? Or, man, my marriage is in trouble and I'm thinking about getting a divorce. Well, now we're in the category of waging war type decisions. We're in these these big decisions that, what I eat for lunch is one thing. It'll affect a day or two, but these other things, man, they can affect the whole trajectory of my life in the same way that waging war does. And so we need to really weigh those things out. The bigger they are, we need to get counsel. And I think sometimes we think that young people are just foolish and make bunches of dumb decisions, and old people are really wise, and I don't think that's true. In fact, I've seen the opposite. I just actually met with a 15-year-old young lady and her dad, and I was blown away. I mean, again and again and again, blown away by the wisdom in this girl. She had so much wisdom, and it was evidenced by these moments throughout her life where she has recognized her own need for counsel, her own need for getting wisdom from other people, her need for advice. I was shocked. I was like, why can't more adults be like this, right? So it's not really an age thing, and sadly, too many of us, we don't do this. We make decisions in isolation, and that always leads to problems. It always leads to trouble, and one of the best examples in the Bible, we don't have time to look at it right now, but in 2 Samuel 11, we see that this guy, King David, God's man, God's king, and for God's nation, Israel, he's supposed to be off at war with the rest of the kings, with everyone else, with all of his men, but he's not. He's at home, he's isolated, he's by himself, and he gets himself in a bad place. He walks up on a roof, he starts checking out his neighbor's wife who's taking a bath. And if you know the story, man, it just, all hell breaks loose. I mean, her husband gets killed, she gets pregnant, thousands of people die. It's this terrible thing, all because he isolated himself, right? When you and I isolate ourselves, we're at our worst. We make bad decisions in a vacuum, right? But David was at his best. First Chronicles 27, it says this in verse 33, Ahithophel was the king's counselor, right? This wise, sage-like voice in David's life. And Hushai, the Archite, was the king's friend. This is David at his best. He's got wise, sage-like counselors, and he's got true friends. That's him at his best. He's got this support, and that's us. That's me at my best, right? Me at my worst is me isolated, making decisions in a vacuum. Me at my best is listening to people who have godly, sage-like wisdom, and listening to people who love me, who care about me, and they're just my friends, right? So this is super important for us if we're going to really make decisions that are going to be good for our lives and good for the lives of other people around us. The human nature is to actually surround yourself with people who only agree with you and to kind of cancel out people who don't. We don't want to listen to people who might push on us a little bit. But Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. When you know it's coming from someone who loves you, who has your best, who loves Jesus, man, there's something actually healing about those wounds. Like they actually cut in a way that leads to life, that makes you better. But profuse are the kisses of an enemy. People say all these nice things about you, but the reality is they don't have your best interest in mind. Now, everybody has opinions, and most people are pretty passionate about those opinions. And so what we shouldn't take away from this is that by many counselors, we need to try to make everybody in our lives happy. That's not what this is. In fact, there's a framework here. These are people who fear the Lord. These are people who have like God's wisdom. And so there's a selection process there where, man, we're really looking for people who love God, love us, and can help give us godly wisdom for our lives. There's just one more major point here that Proverbs makes about how to know God's will for your life, how to make good decisions. This is in Proverbs 11, verse 3. The integrity of the upright guides them. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. What's the difference here between those who are destroyed and those who are guided through life? Well, the difference is their character. There's a crooked character and there's integrity. And so God's wisdom says, hey, character matters in all this. And I think the big lesson that we can learn is that, who you and I are becoming on this journey of life is more important than knowing what we should do in any given moment. And we are obsessed about what we should do. What should I do? Who should I marry? Where should I go? Like, we're obsessed with these decisions, but God's wisdom would step back from that and say, well, yeah, but who are you becoming along the way? And I think for a lot of us, when we read the Bible, we kind of just want God to give us an answer. We meet with someone and we're there to look for wisdom. We just want an answer. What should I do? Tell me, yes or no. What should I do, God? Tell me, yes or no. Just tell me what I should do already. I don't have time for this. I want to just know what I should do. But God cares about more than that. He cares about shaping the why in our heart. He cares about our motives. He cares about our desires. It's bigger than what should I do. It's why do I even ask about that? And why would I want that? And it's not just, I remember learning this lesson when I was single. There was this like, who should I marry? Who should I marry? Who should I marry? And, you just obsess over that. And someone actually said to me, a friend named Brendan, he said, have you ever thought about what kind of man should you be? Like if you're to get married, like what kind of husband should you be? Have you ever thought about that and started working on that? And I was like, I don't care about that. I want to know who should I marry? But I mean, of course, that got into me and like it began to just eat at me. And I remember, walking around a store like a few days later, and I couldn't stop thinking about this thought. Like, okay, well, what kind of man? It never crossed my mind. I was so obsessed with what should I do, I'd never thought about who am I becoming. And I got on that journey and decided, okay, I'm gonna step away from this who should I marry conversation. I'm gonna actually like do some business on what kind of man should I be. And then I'll just trust God to work all this all out. God is more interested in our hearts than he is in giving us quick tips. Rather than spoon feed us answers, God wants to make us into someone who's got the character, the integrity in our heart that we can navigate life's decisions. Tim Keller says this: modern people want a technique for guidance, 5 steps to make good decisions. How many sermons does that sound like, right? But God offers wise character, hard, won over over a lifetime. The decisions that we are making, these little decisions we're making, are actually taking us somewhere. They're actually making us into something. And God cares more about that, right? He cares about that. There's this famous poem, two roads diverged in a hollow wood. And I took the one less traveled by, and it's made all the difference. And God knows that. He knows that the decisions we're making are making a difference. They're turning us into something. They're making us into something. They're taking us somewhere. And God can see that whole picture. And so he with his vantage point of seeing what we're becoming along the way, God knows. He knows what's happening, and he cares about that journey. He cares about our hearts and our integrity. So if we had 2020 to do all over again, I've been thinking about this, what would we have done differently? I mean, we planned as a church, we planned and planned and planned and planned and planned. We had it all planned out. It was our best planned year ever, to be honest with you. We planned out all the sermon series. We planned out all the building projects. We planned out everything. We had it locked down. And then here we are. So would we have prepared and planned less? No, that was right to do. We were getting a war horse prepared for battle. But I tell you what, I know I would have done differently, and I bet all of us would have done differently. Is I would have held these plans with more of an open hand, and I would have put more confidence in God's will. That's what I would have done differently. My heart would have been less sick throughout this year if I had started off like that, not like that. And that's the last thing I want us to look at, is this thing of where our confidence is. In Proverbs 21, verse 1, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Proverbs 16:3, commit your plans, your work, commit it to the Lord, and your plans will be established. The last thing I think we see here is, we should plan well, but we trust in the Lord to do what's best. It's great to have dreams. It's great to have plans. Don't let what 2020's done knock that out of you and me. Don't let it make us someone who becomes pessimistic about life in general and, passive about our plans, or don't let it do that. No, still dream big and plan big and swing for the fences, all of that. But whatever we should learn from this year, we should not put our hope in those plans. We should not set our hope on top of our plans. Fingers crossed it's all going to work out. that is going to lead to our hearts being sick. We should confidently trust in the Lord because he is so good. And nothing, not even 2020, can derail his plan for our life. Do you know that's true? No matter where you're at, no matter do you know you are living in the middle of God's plan for your life? God is not up in heaven going, 2020, you ruined everything. I had all these great plans for all these great people, and look what you did. God is in total control. 2020 is not at the helm. God is. And throughout all these things that happen, we need to be reminded of that. If you think about this guy named Joseph, for those of you who are familiar with the Bible, back in Genesis, this was a good guy, had big plans and lots of talent, had it all going for him, really going places. But then the places he goes ends up being a pit, sold into slavery, and then thrown in prison. Not really working out, not living his best life now, But through all these terrible things, we see that Joseph, he keeps trusting God. He keeps honoring God, and God uses all of this. He turns all this around. And we get to see Joseph meet his brothers at the end of the story there in Genesis chapter 50. He has the chance now to really just take his brothers down for ruining his life and throwing him into slavery and putting him in prison, all this crazy stuff that happens. And here's what he says in verse 20. He says, as for you guys, well, you meant evil against me. Let's call a spade, but God meant it for good. God was at work when you took me and threw me in that pit and left me for dead. When you sold me into slavery, when I got thrown in prison, God was at work, and God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive. So even when we get hit by a 2020 year, man, God is at work. God's at work. Romans 8:28 says, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. All things. For those who are called according to his purpose, God is working behind the scenes. God never takes a day off. The Bible says he doesn't even sleep or slumber. He never even takes a nap. He's always at work, which means that you and I get to take naps and you and I get to sleep. We get to rest because God's at work. We can rest in his work. So as you and I plan well, let's hope in him. Plan well, but hope in him. If you ever feel like doubting that he's in control or that he cares or that he's involved, man, look to the cross. Look to the cross. I mean, if you remember, we saw in Acts that Peter said God both planned the cross and then wicked men were responsible for the cross, but that's not how the story ends. And we pick up in verse 23, Acts 2, Peter carries on, but this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. You crucified and killed him by the hands of lawless men, but God raised him up. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death because it was not possible for him to be held by it. So the plan of God wasn't just that Jesus would be crucified. The plan of God was that Jesus would be crucified and that he would be resurrected. And what this is showing us is that man was at work planning. How do we take Jesus out? How do we crucify Jesus? Man had a plan, and it was for the worst thing, but God had a plan behind the plan. While man was working out the worst thing, God was working out the best thing. God was working out the best thing. They meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God meant it for good. So if God can take the worst thing that ever happened, which wasn't 2020, by the way, it was the crucifixion of the innocent, perfect Son, the only Son, Jesus. If God could take the worst thing that ever happened, the darkest plan that was ever conceived, and he could turn it into the best thing that ever happened, man, what could God do with your life and my life? What could God do with this crazy year we're living in? God only knows. But God has a plan. I don't know what the rest of 2020 has planned for us. My money's on aliens, maybe. I don't know. But I do know that God is at work. And no matter what is coming, God has a plan behind the plan. God is in control, and God has a plan for our good and for his glory. I would encourage you who are watching this to maybe consider taking communion now. And this is the reason why. Not just because it's some little tradition we do. No, it puts our heart back in the right place. It puts our mind back in the right place. This Jesus, he endured the hardest, most terrible of God's plans. I mean, what he went through, nothing you and I are ever going to go through compares to it. And he willingly did it, by the way. It says he knew everything was going to happen, and he was in on it. He was in on the plan. But he did it for our ultimate good. According to the definite plan of God, his body was broken. And according to the wise foreknowledge of God who established the earth, but before the foundations of the earth, God had planned that Jesus' blood would be shed. This was a hard plan, but Jesus did it. He did it for us. And so when we come together and we take communion, it's a chance to acknowledge whatever has happened to me and you does not compare to this. And he did this for us. If you happen to be watching this and you're not yet a follower of Jesus, man, the biggest thing I would tell you to do is not to be worried about what you should do, but to commit yourself to him who gave himself for you. To right now in this moment just say, God, I surrender myself to you. I want to live for you who lived and died for me and rose again. If you're already a follower of Jesus, this is a chance as we take communion to remind ourselves of how much Jesus has done for us and what a guarantee that is of his goodness. I want to close with this last verse. In Romans 8, verse 31, what then shall we say to these things if God is for us? Who can be against us? Murder hornets? No. 2020? No. Whatever. No. Who can be against us if God's for us? He who did not spare his own son. He who didn't spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. How will he not also with him graciously give us all things? No, in all these things, we're more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am confident that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, 2020, nor things to come later in 2020, 2021, whatever, no, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, nothing will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Let's take some time. Let's honor this Jesus. Let's come and acknowledge, man, we've been busted up and messed up and confused and disheartened and disillusioned, but God is on the throne. God is at the helm. God has a plan, and God loves us. God bless you guys.